The message really is about ensuring that disabled people are included in the conversation about mobility justice and concentrating on increasing, as you said, mobility choice for those who are currently the most excluded. And if we remove barriers to mobility to those who are currently the most excluded, then we improve the situation for absolutely everyone else.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman and that is Isabelle Clement, director of the UK charity Wheels for Wellbeing. We're going to be talking about their initiatives and campaigns to try to remove barriers to get everybody out on various forms of bikes and cycles. I am so looking forward to sharing this episode with you. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. It's super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the webpage, and there's several different options, including becoming a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all my video content. Okay, without further ado, here's Isabelle Clement. Isabelle, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, Isabelle, I love giving my guests just an opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is Isabelle?
So I'm Isabelle Clement. I'm the director of a small charity based in London in the UK called Wheels for Wellbeing. And we are the voice of disabled people who cycle or wish to cycle.
I love that. And here's your website. So I think this is so cool. And you and I had a chance to meet briefly at Velo City there in Ghent in Belgium recently, last summer. And I had to get you on the podcast. I had to get you on to be able to chat about this. It's one of the things that I talk about all the time on the Active Towns channel is we need to be creating environments that are appropriate for all ages and all abilities to be able to have mobility freedom. And so, because there's all these like stereotypical assumptions that, oh, you're building bike lanes. That's just for able-bodied people. And I'm like, that's insulting because look, Isabelle. And this entire movement, take us back, rewind a little bit. How did you get involved in this and become so passionate about this topic and this movement?
Sure. So I'm not somebody who would have originally thought of herself as a cyclist at all. I'm a disabled person. I was disabled from very tiny childhood. So walking's never been a great thing. It's been kind of useful to some extent, but it's really been a limiting factor in my mobility. Well, in fact, my parents tried me on a bicycle when I was 10 as a big kind of reward for a big milestone. I can't remember what it was. I got my first bike and we tried it and it didn't work. Couldn't balance, couldn't keep my feet on the pedal. It wasn't going to work. So we put cycling as the can't do category and moved on, did other things. But I apparently I learned that supposedly I couldn't cycle at the age of 10 and never thought of it again. I was very privileged to be able to get a driver's license and my first car as pretty much, I think I got my first car at 20. And from there on, I was very mobile, but that was with the use of a car. And my assumptions, like a lot of disabled people's assumptions, was that unless I could drive, I couldn't go. So that didn't set me off very well for being passionately leading a disability and cycling organisation. But this was all in France. I'm French originally. And I came to the UK in my early 20s and then carried on being a driver, very mobile, very, very... I got involved in the disability sector, in the disability movement in the UK, which I found very empowering. And got very involved in social care and fighting for disabled people's right to control their social care. All very well. And then in the mid 2000s, 2005, a wonderful woman called Janet Pask, who was working for a disability organisation I was involved with in South London, she had this, what I thought was a crazy idea of setting up an organisation which could support disabled people into cycling. She was a cyclist, not with physical impairments at all. She used to run a service for disabled people, a welfare benefits advice service, and she was helping her clients with difficulties with accessing services, difficulties with not having enough money to live on, difficulties with accessing transport, issues with not being able to get the health support they needed, etc., etc. And she was a cyclist, and she knew that her cycling was very cheap, so didn't need any long-term resourcing, could get her places, gave her the independence that she wanted and she needed, gave a boost to her mental health, etc., etc. And she always thought, if only my clients could cycle, it wouldn't magic away all their issues, but actually would really mitigate some of the issues relating to the barriers they encounter in life through their disability. And she created this amazing organisation called Wheels for Wellbeing. And I had been involved in voluntary organisations before, charities, and I was asked to go on the board. And I thought, well, okay, I can do that. I can help. But it's only some years later that, having just supported her in terms of governance with this organisation, me and a few others, she got it off the ground, she got it going, but I wasn't particularly very closely involved, and I still thought it was a bit of a crazy idea, but why not? And in parallel to that, I was getting on with my life, and I had a child, and he got to his 4th birthday, and we got him a little bike. And I just suddenly found myself thinking, well, maybe I'm going to not be able to take him to the park anymore, because I used to use my wheelchair in the park with him. I used to park, give my wheelchair out the boot, take him to the park. And that was all fine. He'd be on my lap, or he'd been, walking around, toddling around. But once he was on wheels, off it, with it under his own steam. Exactly. I was thinking that I'm going to lose him. So do I stop taking him into the park, or do I find myself equipped with something else that is a bit more all-terrain, a bit more kind of, because the wheelchair up a hilly park or across the grass, no use at all. So I started.
And of course, being involved with Wheels for Wellbeing, you're like, oh, wait, I have an idea.
Well, kind of. I wasn't even that convinced. I thought maybe a mobility scooter, an electric thing that older people sit on, and I wasn't particularly thrilled. Anyway, long story short, eventually I came across, before having bought anything, I came across what's on screen here, the concept of a clip-on hand cycle. And it clipped on to a wheelchair, to the front of a wheelchair. And the rest is history in a way. But that was my first encounter with, not even at the time being on roads and being a cyclist, but just going through parks, being a kind of going on walks with my child, or following my child in the park, or going on walks with friends suddenly, because actually that was so much more powerful and I had more control, brakes, etc., that you don't really have on a wheelchair. And eventually, when I actually became the director of Wheels for Wellbeing some years later, I then thought, no, this is very silly. Why am I not thinking of this as a cycle? And what it was at the time was that it didn't have power assist. It was just a front wheel, but it was only my power, which, when it's your shoulders, your neck and your arms rather than your legs and gravity, it's quite a lot more effort. And I got equipped with this baby on the screen there, which has electric assist. And I took some advice from the wonderful people at Wheels for Wellbeing about cycling on the road, because even though I could drive, I'd never been on a cycle on the road. And the rest is history, really. Then it really got me going, and I've increased my confidence, and now I not only run a disability charity, but I am definitely, I consider myself as somebody who cycles on a regular basis, and it's wonderful.
Redefining that term of who we think of when we say the word cyclist. It's redefining what we think about. tell me this. We'll talk a little bit more about the word that you used earlier, which was barriers, and we'll talk about several different interpretations of barriers, including, what it takes for all ages and abilities to comfortably ride on the road. But before we do that, I want to just pause and have you, describe for the audience, how did this make you feel when you finally discovered this?
It's quite incredible. For me, as I say, mobility wasn't so much an issue because I could drive, but driving doesn't make me feel great. It gets me places, but I'm in this box behind my wheel and I'm not actually physically active. And I'm not a sporty person, and I've never found, I had until then never found any physical activity that either didn't injure me or gave me any pleasure. It was either physical therapy, physiotherapy, which is a bore, or I could swim, but you can't swim daily as part of your life. It's actually quite a lot of things you have to do to get to swimming, and it takes a lot of time. And suddenly having this ability to power my life forward under my own steam, and just getting pleasure rather than pain. Literally, I was getting endorphins for the first time in my life because I was making an effort. My heart was pumping, my lungs were filling, and I was really feeling that whoosh, that excitement, which when I've spoken to a lot of people who cycle, they kind of forgotten that because they felt it when they were teeny child, and they got this first excitement, like suddenly they were independent and they could go. I'd never particularly experienced that until my mid-30s, which is, it's not sad, it's just a reality. But it was such a powerful feeling of actually being physically active and going somewhere and feeling well at the end of it, as opposed to hot and puffy and bothered and in pain, which was my previous experience of moving about under my own steam. So absolutely fantastic feeling, which ever since I've been wanting to make sure that people realize that this is possible. We don't all have to do it. It's not compulsory, but it's an amazing thing. It's a tool for mobility, for moving around, but also it's an amazing way of feeling well. And also, I'm not getting any younger, and disabled people with mobility issues tend to, end up being very, very sedentary, and being sedentary is not good for you. And the stark reality is that a lot of us die younger than the majority, and we need to find those ways to build into our lives to be physically active. So that's the story.
And it's inherent in the organization's name, Wheels for Wellbeing. And you mentioned pleasure several times and the fantastic feeling. So yeah, it's inherent in the name, Wheels for Wellbeing, and the names or the words that you used, pleasure and the feeling, fantastic feeling. But it's also represented in this photo here of the smile on your face and the smile on your bike too.
That's right.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
And being part of the community around me, because again, as I say, I was driving for years, but it's only when I started cycling that I actually was making eye contact with people around me, the people on the footway, the people crossing the road, and actually, in fact, seeing me move along puts a smile on people's face. Generally, they go, "Oh my goodness! Oh wow! What's that?" The kids go, "Mom, I want one of them." And they've never said that about my wheelchair, but it's the same wheelchair. But it's turned into a bike, and it looks powerful. It looks cool. I like that.
Yeah,
I want that for everyone. Oh, look at her.
And look at her. Yeah. And this brings up the question, how does this logistically really work? We saw the image of you, taking the lane in a slower street. Maybe it's a low traffic neighborhood. I'm not sure, but it's clearly a shared lane. But then here's, the logistics of how you get in and out of buildings.
That's right. Actually, if you move the picture very slightly up, you can see it's actually number 10 Downing Street.
Oh,
and this is me.
That's a famous address.
It's that famous address, which is why I'm looking so proud with myself. This is my current cycle. It doesn't. I should put a smile back on its battery. That's definitely something I should look out for again. So it's my current model of clip-on hand cycle. But whichever one I cycle, because it's a very, very expensive piece of kit, I do not leave it on street, and particularly not if I'm going to 10 Downing Street. But anyway, but I wouldn't leave it outside. So for me to be able to get somewhere, it's no longer that I need a disabled parking space for my car. It's that I need to actually cycle all the way into my destination. And Downing Street's no problem. They will put out a ramp for you, and you can cycle in and you can cycle back out. And I had just been to a meeting about the cycling, the big cycle policy called gear change. This is some years ago under Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And there was a whole committee of people trying to work out how to implement gear change, which was a big policy document about increasing the place of cycling in the UK and a big investment programme. So I am part of a new agency called Active Travel England as a non-executive director, and we were discussing the programme at Downing Street. It's the only one meeting we've had at Downing Street, but I was very, very pleased with myself having cycled in and cycled back out.
Yeah. You mentioned Active Travel England. Of course, that's a wonderful, prominent organization that's part of the government that has been established. Chris is at the top of that, correct? Chris Boardman?
Chris Boardman is absolutely. He's the National Commissioner for Cycling, and he is the chair of Active Travel England.
Fantastic, yes. And of course, many people might recognize that name as a former Olympian, I believe gold medal winner, also a Tour de France stage winner, maybe a couple times, something like that. But really, this is not to like derail the conversation and talk about sports cycling, but the point that I like to bring up about what Chris is doing is similar to what you're doing. Is we're having these discussions at the highest levels of government because we need to start addressing these institutional and systematic challenges that we have. And I love the fact that the work that you're doing is like gaining traction and getting attention. And some of that attention has resulted in like acknowledgments, for yourself too, including this.
I know.
What happened here?
A very proud moment of being awarded. It's called an MBE award, which is a Member of the British Empire medal for, in my case, service to charity. Mainly in my involvement with Wheels for Wellbeing and other voluntary organisations in the UK. So yes, very proud.
Now, typically an MBE is awarded and acknowledged with the royal family, but that didn't happen in this case. Why don't you explain, kind of the logistics of that and what resulted later on after Brexit?
Yes. Oh, well, that's a kind of parallel story. But at the time, I was not a British citizen. I was a French citizen, as I mentioned before. I'm originally French, and being a European, a member of the European community, the EU, we had pretty much the same rights as UK citizens, bar the ability to vote in general elections once every 5 years. And therefore, even though I'd lived here for three decades by then, I hadn't actually sought to obtain British citizenship. It was kind of at the back of my mind for a long time. I really ought to do that. My life is here.
Well, you were busy.
Exactly. I had things to do. And I'd left it every 5 years. I'd go, I should have done it by now. I really want to vote. And then life would carry on. And then, yes, let's not get too political, but Brexit happened, and my feeling of just being quite happy just being a French citizen because it didn't make any difference suddenly started to feel like I ought to really do this and affirm my nationality as a British citizen. So I had all the same rights as British citizens, which I kind of had with what was given to us as a settled status, but that didn't quite feel secure enough. And I am now a British citizen, but at the time of the award, I was not a binational, and I therefore was awarded an honorary MBE, which is absolutely fine. It's the same thing, really, but it was a slightly different process, and it wasn't awarded by the Queen or the Royal Family, or a member of the Royal Family at the time. It was the Minister for Active Travel at the Department for Transport who awarded it to me, which in a way was totally meaningful anyway. So
quite appropriate too.
Very appropriate.
Fantastic. So I want to dive into a little bit of what we were talking about in terms of the barriers and the perceived barriers that are out there. You addressed one of the perceived barriers, which is just this assumption and this belief that it's really not for you. And that's literally like the tagline that exists on the the Wheels for Wellbeing website. It's like, think you can't cycle, think again. We're going to help remove some of these barriers. And there are many barriers. Talk a little bit about not only the perception, barriers, the barriers within our own minds collectively, but also like the real barriers, the physical barriers that are out there that are preventing not only people who have mobility challenges or other types of disabilities, but also just everyone. What are some of the barriers that are getting, encouraging more people to be active and get on a bike or mobility device?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, particularly from the point of view of disabled people, there are a multitude of barriers to cycling, and we at Wheels for Wellbeing, we've started doing a regular survey of disabled people who cycle and their views and the needs that they encounter as disabled people who cycle. We've taken the survey. It's a very non-scientific survey because we're not a big academic institution. We're not the government. We don't have a lot of means, but we on a regular basis put out an online survey and say to disabled people, tell us what your views are. And they're very clear and very consistent. The main barriers to cycling, if you're a disabled person, are, first of all, the recognition that people like me, people like us, can do this, because we never see ourselves in cycling reports, cycling marketing, cycling imagery. So, as you said, we need to realize we could do this, and that's one of the things that Wheels for Wellbeing is trying to make bigger, is the awareness that this is a thing. Disabled people do cycle. But then next is absolutely the infrastructure. If you cycle a non-standard cycle, as we call our little beasties of all kinds, a tricycle, a hand cycle, a tandem, a side-by-side tandem, a recumbent tandem, etc., a hand cycle, as I said, you will often come across bits of hard infrastructure which clearly tell you that you're not meant to be here, or we never thought that you might want to be here, therefore we didn't build it for you. So it's either a hard cycle lane, protected, nice, lovely bit of protected cycling infrastructure, but if it's too narrow, then you're stuck into the road, thrown into the road with the traffic, when actually there was protection provided, because it's recognized that this road needs to protect, we need to protect cyclists on this particular road. Well, cyclists who are wider cycle just have to go onto the road. So that won't do. Literal barriers, chicanes, barriers to accessing sometimes rural cycle paths, but even in the city, a lot of areas have got width restrictions to slow people down, or stop. The main reason we find is generally to stop mopeds, motorcyclists from going through pedestrian environments generally. And that's a terrible thing for Wheels for Wellbeing, for disabled cyclists, because they're everywhere and they are generally at the entrance of good bits of cycling infrastructure, the better ones, the more secure ones. And those we're barred from because we have allegedly too wide a cycle. So, yes, I love the picture you've just put on, which is a report that is a review and a report that were carried out by Sustrans, a big charity in the UK, which I know you featured there, the National Cycle Network, when you interviewed Laura Laker recently, who wrote this wonderful book about the experience of using the National Cycle Network and its huge potential for supporting more people into cycling. And they did a big review of this National Cycle Network some years ago and produced this report and some recommendations, because the National Cycle Network, which Sustrans are the custodian of, they don't own most of the land it's on, but they are the custodian of the National Cycle Network. And it was in a pretty poor state at the time of this review. And one of the terrible findings of the review was that there were 16,000 plus barriers on this supposedly wonderful, a lot of it off-road, safe cycle network. But non-standard cycle users were barred from using it. So physical barriers have to be solved, have to be removed mostly. And in fact, now that's been recognized by Sustrans as one of their key 15 priorities that they had at the end of the review. I was asked to be on their review strategic board, and I insisted that this needed to absolutely be one of the recommendations, because unless it's tackled, then we continue to only provide cycling infrastructure to those who already can use it. Those who can pick up their cycle, put it over their shoulder, and scramble over these weird contraptions. There are so many different bits of, so many elements of brain power have been put into inventing new contraptions. It's like torture implements. And no, they have no place on cycling infrastructure. And in fact, the reason they're there, which tends to be to stop moped users and people who might be in the way or creating danger for the users, for the pedestrians or the cyclists on those paths. In fact, those people who are misusing the cycle paths can just pick up their mopeds and just throw it over or under or do whatever they want, and they end up you still find them. They still find a way. It's just another challenge for them. And what we need to do is enforce the fact that they're not meant to be there. And if they're creating, they're behaving badly, they're behaving antisocially, then their moped needs to be confiscated or whatever the police can do. But by putting these contraptions in place, what we do is we bar the legitimate users, the people who are starting off in their cycling, on their journey into cycling, who are less confident, who need to build up their stamina, etc., who maybe want to do it at the beginning as a leisure activity, and then can potentially start thinking about doing it, more on a utilitarian utility activity to get places rather than just on a Sunday afternoon. We're barring all these people who need the exercise, who are more isolated, who are less physically active. We're barring all of these people from benefiting from the investment we've put into some good infrastructure for the health benefits of the nation. So it's a nonsense. And nobody was saying that, well, cyclists were saying this is really inconvenient, but they weren't getting very far with grumbling about it. And the difference we're making, I think, is that as disabled people who wish to cycle or who do already cycle but want to cycle more, or who don't currently cycle but want to start, we're able to say, look, this is very much an issue of equality and fairness. And in fact, we have equality legislation in the UK. And no, it's not lawful to be putting public investment into things which discriminate against disabled people. That's just against the law.
Well,
full
and
stop.
I'd also say that, this is an example of a blind spot. This is an example of an ableism pedestrian blind spot where, look, we need to get these high speed moped, scooter, maybe even, in modern terminology, powerful e-bike riders. We don't want them on here. And so we're going to create barriers for that. But the unintended consequences of this are what we've been describing. But I can also think of at least one really, relevant example where it could be a completely able-bodied person. It could be a mom, with her cargo bike with her kids and wanting to get to a meaningful destination. She too would not be able to do this because she wouldn't necessarily have the ability to navigate the chicane, or in the case of something that needs to be lifted over, she wouldn't necessarily have the ability to lift, a cargo bike loaded with kids over the top of. So again, I think that we have to have a little bit of grace and understanding and empathy for the fact that it was a blind spot. It was like there was a legitimate reason for wanting to create these barriers, but the unintended consequences end up being pretty devastating for accessibility for, again, all ages and all abilities to be able to, enjoy these critical bits of nature oftentimes, but also critical mobility junctions and connections to be able to go about one's life, because it may not just be recreation and in well-being. It may be like a critical barrier to getting to a meaningful destination like one's job or to school or to something else. So I'm glad we were able to hone in on that. Yeah.
Absolutely, and this is something that I had myself a blind spot on what you just described in terms of the connections to be made between different groups of people who want to use cycling and who were until recently being completely excluded. And I found myself at a seminar years back on a campaign. The London Cycling Campaign was having one of its policy seminars, and I found myself in a little group discussing things with a family cycling campaigner, this lady called Ruth Anna McQueen, and she and I just looked at each other and thought, hang on a minute, we're talking the same language. We're talking about the same barriers. And together we then went away and then decided actually we needed to fight together to build a coalition of people with those who experience exactly the same barriers. We disabled people have an additional barrier of kind of the finality of the end of the road, literally, if we can't stand up and get off our cycle and maybe push it and fight around the chicane. But parents and also small logistics companies who use cargo cycles we have our lives to live, we have our businesses to run, we have our children to move around, we have the shopping to get home, and we're using cycles which can do all of these things very efficiently and very sustainably for the planet. But we can't do it for the same reasons. So that the infrastructure, the fact that there's not many of us about, or they weren't at the time, so we weren't visible, we weren't recognized, and people like us didn't know it was possible. But also the cost of our cycles, these cargo cycles, and our non-standard disability-specific sometimes cycles are really expensive. So they're heavy, they're wider, they're longer, they're more expensive. They're therefore more difficult and more important to store and park securely, because we can't invest over £5,000 plus in a piece of kit which could disappear just because there's no proper cycle parking provision for it, secure enough. And we can't put it over our shoulders and walk up some steps and come out the other side and cross the bridge and come down the steps again the other side, etc. So there is a real commonality of issues from the people who are cycling as a family with babies and little children and toddlers and little people on their little cycles alongside you. Cycling logistics companies and disabled cyclists. So back in long before COVID, probably 2018 maybe, we created something called the Beyond the Bicycle Coalition, which was all about an alliance, a coalition of those of us who use non-standard cycles. Cargo trikes, cargo cycles are just as non-standard as my clip-on, and that's it. It's a little group of individuals. There's no funding behind it. There's just the energy of a few people, just saying, listen to us. We're not tiny little niche groups. We're a huge group of people if you put us all together, and we could be once we've addressed the issues that our coalition are bringing to the table, then we've got the power of addressing, for example, the problem of the school run traffic. We don't have, I think in America you've got the school buses are a lot better organized, but we don't have that in many places in the UK. And the traffic this week is half term in London, and it's beautiful. There's hardly any traffic because the schools are off. Next week they come back, the traffic will return. So if we could promote cargo cycling for parents, then we could get rid of a lot of the traffic and the pollution in cities and elsewhere. And again, what we call here the white van problem, the delivery vans, which are crisscrossing our communities, all the more so now that there are online, the online retailing business is grown massively. So there's plenty of people delivering by vans around our residential areas and in our cities. And we could get rid of a lot of that traffic if only we provided proper infrastructure and financial support, etc., for people who want to do this by bike, by cycle.
Yeah. And I think we'll move away from the barriers, the chicanes on the paths, and we'll start talking about the LTNs. But I did want to mention just one thing before we do that, and that's that this blind spot continues to this day. I literally had a representative from the state of Pennsylvania reach out to me earlier this week and ask, what do I think about putting in chicanes at the trailheads to keep high-speed scooters off? And I said, no, this is why. And I mentioned that I was going to be speaking with you, and so they're looking forward to listening to and watching this episode. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about this, because it is a blind spot. There's just people that think one direction, we need to stop these high-speed motor scooters from getting in, we'll put this in, but the unintended consequences really decrease accessibility. But let's move on to the on-street, because this is you just mentioned the prior to COVID and the pandemic, but post-COVID and during COVID, during the lockdown and until certain things started to change a little bit there in the UK and specifically in London. Walk us through this, and how does this relate back to accessibility and mobility for you and, the folks that you're really advocating for with Wheels for Wellbeing?
Yes. So that was fascinating for me because, as I said, I'd discovered I could cycle, and I really started to cycle on roads 2011, some time ago. But in fact, I was a very timid cyclist at the time. I was a novice cyclist, just to start with, because I'd never done it before on the roads, but very timid. I was still very limited as to where I would go, and I would know a few routes, and I would stick to those, and anything else I would still take the car. I might put the cycle, the clip-on hand cycle and the wheelchair in the boot of the car and get nearer and then cycle the little bit that I felt secure on. But so I was commuting from home to work, which is not very far at all. And otherwise, I wasn't doing very much else cycling other than talk a lot about it. And then the pandemic came, and so we had something called low traffic neighborhoods suddenly be provided across a lot of the city as a bit of in an emergency where the nation was saying, well, no, we can't congregate, we can't get into groups, but we should be walking and cycling. We can do this for an hour a day. That's good for everyone. It's good for our health. Let's provide for more of it for people. So a lot of local streets were barred to drivers, or at least drivers were limited in, they weren't able to get through a neighborhood. They could get in or via one end, or they could get in via the other, but they couldn't get through. And that kind of constrained the convenience of cars. And in fact, I was explaining on that slide that when I did a presentation to various people at the time, that where I lived, I was surrounded by low traffic neighbourhoods. My borough, Lambeth Council, put them out everywhere, and all of my favourite cut-throughs in my car to avoid traffic, they were getting blocked off. And as a lot of drivers, I was going, oh my God, all my favourite, this is a bit rough, this is a bit tough. But luckily, I was equipped already to cycle. I had my clip-on hand cycle, and I was I was somebody who wanted to cycle more. So I thought, hang on a minute, that's probably actually going to really help me, because those routes which I drove through all the time, I didn't cycle through, because there were local roads which actually, I don't know what it's like in the States, but at the moment in the UK, road maintenance budgets are quite limited because there's not a lot of cash around. So there's a lot of potholes. There's a lot of the road surface of local roads, which are not the main thoroughfares across the city. They're more, they could be safer for cycling, but actually because of the potholes, the bad quality of the cycle, the road surface, as a tricyclist, my wheelchair and my clip-on hand cycle turned me into a tricycle. It's really quite dangerous to try and avoid all of these potholes if there's cars going up and down around you and it's not a very wide road. So, in fact, the low traffic neighborhoods, by removing the rat running traffic, made it actually, it didn't change the quality of the road surface, still as bad, but I could maneuver my way around it quite safely. And therefore, suddenly I found myself able to cycle many more miles across the city, because there were all those pockets of local roads which could have been safer to cycle. There were actually there was something called the London Cycle Network, which was taking people through these back roads, back streets. But I never used them because, as I say, they were quite dangerous for me and drivers to be cohabitating. So remove the number of drivers. There were still drivers on those roads, but much more calm circumstances because they couldn't get through fast. I suddenly realized I could take those really pleasant, less polluted, less trafficky roads, etc. So I started to go off and discover my local neighborhood, especially during COVID. I spent time with friends going to find new bits of greenery. There's actually quite a lot of parks around London, but we made it our quest to go and find new little bits of green, little parks, etc. And I wanted to go and check out all those low traffic neighborhoods. And it took me I was then able to reach bits of really quite impressive bits of cycling infrastructure, which had been invested in some time ago, called the cycle superhighways, which were meant as commuting roads across London. But I'd never managed to make use of them because it was too scary to get to them, to get anywhere near them. With the low traffic neighborhoods, I was able to, quite safe, feeling very safe, go further into town and go and join in with cycle superhighways, which then took me into the centre of London, etc. So suddenly it was like expanding my wings and my ambitions, because the city was cyclable. Now, it's not without controversy, because a lot of people are very angry about low traffic neighborhoods. They've become a bit of a toxic term. And to be honest, a lot of disabled people have found them really inconvenient and have got very angry about their ability to drive or be picked up by or dropped off by taxis, etc., in their neighbourhoods as being inconvenienced by low traffic neighbourhoods. And as a disabled people's organisation at Wheels for Wellbeing, We understand that. We understand the experience of other disabled people who do not currently cycle or may never want to or be able to cycle because of all the barriers we've talked about. So we're not saying low traffic neighborhoods are fantastic for everyone, except they could be. They just have to be provided for in a by ensuring that disabled people in their neighborhoods are consulted and indicate areas which really would make it really difficult. And generally, a planter or a camera to stop people going through, etc. That can be a few hundred meters forwards or backwards. There's a choice made at one point. And if you take into account the needs of disabled people who live on the street, and there won't be every house will have a disabled person in them, but a few will. And it's about connecting to the neighborhood and planning with the people who could be very negatively impacted and asking them for their views. And once we've done that, let's inconvenience everybody else, but just not the people who have no other choice currently but to drive or be driven. And that's a small minority, but really important in terms of transport justice, mobility justice. We have to make sure that we take the most excluded into account before we do anything to change radically a neighborhood's layout. So, as I say, we're very pro cycling infrastructure, anything that makes it better for disabled people and everybody else to cycle. But we are very anti inconveniencing or removing options for other disabled people who do not currently cycle or even walk or wheel, because some people just do not have the local circumstances to be able to take steps or to wheel along even a tiny bit, and they have to be picked up from outside their front door, or they have to be dropped off outside the destination. And sometimes we find that the changes in our neighborhoods is being done without taking that into account, and that's damaging. And it's damaging to the whole idea of improving active travel infrastructure and active travel provision.
And sometimes it's also just, we were talking about perceptions earlier. Sometimes it's a misperception and that gets sort of blown out of proportion through misinformation. And sometimes, the resistance to the status quo of drive everywhere for everything gets blown up to the point where, what this means is you won't be able to get outside of you leave out your front door. You won't be able to travel where you want to go. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
But it's really important to bring the temperature level down, get rid of the myths and the rhetoric that's happening. And I love the fact that you're literally working on the cutting edge of, the other disability organizations and saying, yes, we hear you, we understand you, we think the same thing, we feel the same thing. What we're talking about here is not going to prevent accessibility. We want to enhance accessibility and choice. It's even, like my stepfather is primarily gets around by wheelchair. So he's suffers from post-polio, and he's gotten to the point now where, he pretty much needs to use a mechanical wheelchair to get around. Well, it just so happens in his neighborhood, where he and my mom are located, the sidewalk network is good enough, and there's meaningful destinations within reasonable distances that he and mom can take out. She can walk and he can be in the motorized wheelchair and get to meaningful destinations. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about decreasing the rat running for non-UK folks. That means the cut-through traffic of folks driving quickly because they want to avoid a traffic jam somewhere else or high traffic somewhere else, and they're cutting through what would normally be low traffic, low speed streets. And that's what these LTNs do. Low traffic neighborhoods are, configured in such a way where you can increase the mobility for people walking, biking, rolling, strolling across a wide variety of mobility devices. So I love that I was able to profile several LTNs when I was there, and we talked a little bit about with several individuals, both in the Hackney neighborhood as well as Sustrans took me around to some of the neighborhoods, maybe even in your neighborhood, of some of the LTN installations there, and we walked through some of those challenges and working with the communities and working with the the different boroughs and understanding, okay, this is what we're talking about. A lot of this is communication, because if we leave it into the void of people's perceptions and minds to go run crazy, then, a lot of myths get put out and a lot of misinformation gets put out. To close us out here, Isabelle, I'm going to run a little bit of your video clip and just let you provide some final thoughts for the audience that we haven't yet covered, that really pearls of wisdom that you'd like to leave the audience with before we say goodbye today.
Thank you. So, yes, little clips of me cycling and raving about my discovery of cycling, but
and a previous hairdo too. So,
and a previous hairdo. This is a few years ago, and really, the message really is about ensuring that disabled people are included in the conversation about mobility justice, and concentrating on increasing, as you said, mobility choice for those who are currently the most excluded. And if we remove barriers to mobility to those who are currently the most excluded, then we improve the situation for absolutely everyone else. But let's not leave it to after having done things to then realizing that, oh no, we forgot, we had a blind spot and we forgot to provide for X, Y, and Z. At that point, it's really hard to reverse the issue. It's really expensive. So we need to support disabled people into these conversations. We need to inform people. And we need to, I would say this because I run a disability organization which is expert in this area, we have to continue to get into conversation with experts in people who are from groups who are the most excluded, and disabled people are one of those. There are others, and let's resource those organizations to be able to engage, to be able to have informed conversation, because it actually it's a minefield. Planning highways, planning cycleways, planning public realm, etc. There's a lot of complications, a lot of legislation. There's a lot of, but if we don't have, it used to be there weren't any women in transport. It's getting a bit better, but we were. The amount of blind spots that were being created as just simply not having women at the table, but by not having disabled people at the table, by not having young people at the table, by not having older people at the table, by not having people from different ethnic communities at the table, we're not listening to the real end users who, if we're not providing for those needs, we are shutting out a whole load of people, not only from mobility and transport, but therefore shutting people out from education, from our own community, from all our communities, from being able to contribute and work, and also from being able to age well and not ending up, personally as having a difficult time with our health and costing the community a lot of money for being ill far too young. So it's about let's ensure that we are bringing in people into the conversation who are experts in. As I said, I never was a cyclist. I'm definitely not an engineer. I'm no techie. I knew nothing about pavements and curbs and widths and of lanes and camber and gradients. I did not speak those languages, but I have educated myself and I have come to the table with my perspective, and my organization is now much bigger than me, and it's gone. We are able to be at the table and review technical plans, review policies, advise about bits of legislation changes that are needed, and hopefully making the whole of the provision for active transport a lot more efficient, a lot better, a lot more cost efficient, a lot less wasteful, and for the long term. So we have been able to be involved. We were fortunate enough to be around and to be assertively saying we can bring a new knowledge to you guys, and doors were open to us when national guidance were being revised, when London's cycling design guidance was being revised, etc. And now those documents are much better documents because they are encompassing all, a much wider range of needs. And it's no longer that every cycling design guidance is talking about the space envelope of the bicycle. No, that's not where we start. We start with what is now called the cycle design vehicle, and these are the dimensions. They're much wider, they're much longer, the swept path, etc., much wider. And once we've provided for those, of course we've provided for the bicycle at the same time, but also for the cargo bike and for the trailer with kids in the back, or etc. So hopefully we're bringing knowledge into a perspective which brings knowledge which is much more inclusive, not just of disabled people's needs, but of the whole population.
Yes, brilliant. Well said. Again, Isabelle Clement, Director of Wheels for Wellbeing. Thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. And folks, if you want to learn more about Wheels for Wellbeing, I'll make sure to have the link in the show notes down below. Once again, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. This has been such a joy and pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Isabelle Clement. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell and turn all notifications on. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options, including becoming a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all my video content, but you could also leave a donation to the nonprofit Advocates for Healthy Communities, as well as buy me a coffee and leaving a tip right here on YouTube via super thanks right down below. Should be. Every little bit helps and is very much appreciated. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers.
And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.